Number 15. Portugal literally moved its entire capital to Brazil and ruled Europe from South America for 13 years. So, imagine your entire government, royal family, and like 10,000 nobles fleeing across the Atlantic Ocean to escape Napoleon's army. That's exactly what happened in 1807, when Portugal pulled off probably the most audacious escape plan in European history. Prince John VI, fearing Napoleon's invasion, ordered every single important person in Portugal to board ships headed to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We're talking about the Queen, the entire court, senior officials, libraries full of precious books, priceless art collections, and honestly, the entire governmental apparatus packing up and sailing to their colony. The fleet of ships left Lisbon on November 29, 1807, just days before French forces marched into the Portuguese capital. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. From 1808 until 1821, Rio de Janeiro wasn't just Brazil's capital, it was Portugal's capital too. For 13 long years, Rio de Janeiro functioned as the seat of power for the entire Portuguese Empire, making it the first and only European capital to ever exist outside of Europe. Picture European diplomats sailing across the Atlantic for 2 months just to deliver a simple letter to their own government. When British merchants wanted to negotiate with Portugal, they had to book passage to South America. The Portuguese weren't governing from Lisbon anymore, they were running their ancient European kingdom from a tropical city on the other side of the world. And get this, Portugal didn't just set up a temporary government office in Rio. Prince John created the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves in 1815, actually elevating Brazil to equal status with Portugal itself. He established universities, botanical gardens, the first Bank of Brazil, an opera house, medical schools, and military academies. Brazil went from colony to co-kingdom while still technically being governed by the Portuguese crown. When Prince John finally returned to Portugal in 1821, under massive pressure from angry Portuguese citizens who felt abandoned, he left his son Pedro in charge. Just 1 year later, Pedro declared Brazil's independence, becoming Emperor Pedro I. So Portugal's escape plan accidentally created one of South America's largest independent nations. Number 14. Eating on public transport can get you in serious trouble with transit police. You're riding the metro in Lisbon, munching on a sandwich because, honestly, you're starving after a long day of sightseeing. Suddenly a transit officer approaches, and you're facing official reprimands and possible fines. Welcome to Portugal, where eating on buses, trams, or metros isn't just frowned upon, it's actually illegal. The Portuguese take their public transport etiquette so seriously that they've made it a punishable offense to snack while riding. This law stems from the cultural belief that eating while in transit breaches proper social conduct and hygiene standards. Think about what this means for tourists. You can't grab a quick breakfast pastry on your way to work, you can't sip coffee on the morning commute, and you definitely can't nibble on those famous pastéis de nata while riding the iconic tram 28 up to São Jorge Castle. Transit staff are authorized to confront violators and issue warnings. The Portuguese see their public transportation as shared community space that deserves the same respect as someone's living room. Meanwhile, in cities like New York or London, eating on the subway is so common that, honestly, some trains practically smell like mobile restaurants. But in Portugal, the message is clear: satisfy your hunger before boarding or wait until you disembark. This cultural difference catches thousands of tourists off guard every single year, creating awkward confrontations with transit authorities who are simply enforcing what locals consider basic civilized behavior. Number 13. Portugal had the longest-lived colonial empire in world history, lasting 584 years. From 1415 to 1999, Portugal maintained colonial territories somewhere on Earth. That's 584 consecutive years of empire, making it the longest-lived colonial power in European history. When Portugal conquered Ceuta in North Africa on August 21, 1415, they launched an empire that would outlast every other European colonial power. The British Empire collapsed in the mid-20th century. The French, gone. The Dutch, history. But Portugal held on to territories until 1999 when they finally handed Macau back to China. That's well into the era of smartphones and the internet. At its peak in the early 17th century, Portugal controlled territory on 5 continents simultaneously. They had Brazil in South America, Angola and Mozambique in Africa, Goa in India, Macau in China, East Timor in Southeast Asia, and various Atlantic islands. The Portuguese Empire covered 5.5 million square kilometers at its greatest extent, making it one of the 10 largest empires in human history. They were the first Europeans to reach India by sea, the first to establish direct trade with Japan, the first to circumnavigate the globe under Ferdinand Magellan, and the first to map significant portions of Africa's coastline. But here's the uncomfortable truth that textbooks often gloss over. Portugal was also the first European nation to establish the transatlantic slave trade. In 1526, they conducted the first slave voyage from Africa to Brazil, creating the horrific triangular trade system. They would transport European manufactured goods to Africa, trade them for enslaved people, ship those people across the Atlantic under nightmarish conditions to work Brazilian sugar plantations and gold mines, then send the products back to Europe for profit. This brutal system, pioneered by Portugal, became the template other European powers copied. Over the following centuries, approximately 3 to 4 million enslaved Africans passed through Rio de Janeiro's ports alone. The legacy of this empire isn't just about exploration and trade routes, it fundamentally shaped the demographics, languages, cultures, and ongoing racial inequalities across continents that persist to this day. Ask a Portuguese person their full name and, well, prepare to write an essay. Most Portuguese citizens carry at least 4 different names, sometimes 6 or even 8, and they consider this perfectly normal. This elaborate naming tradition comes from the cultural practice of honoring ancestors by giving children the names of their grandparents in addition to their own first and last names. So a typical person might be named João Miguel Silva Santos Costa Pereira, with João being his first name, Miguel his second first name, Silva and Santos from his mother's family, and Costa Pereira from his father's family. Just picture trying to fill out government forms or sign official documents with an 8-part name that barely fits on a single line. Portuguese parents meticulously select names that connect their children to multiple family branches, ensuring that grandparents, great-grandparents, and other ancestors are memorialized through each generation. This isn't just about tradition, it's about maintaining family connections and showing respect to those who came before. When someone introduces themselves, they might only use 1 or 2 names casually, but their official documentation carries the full ancestral record. This creates fascinating situations at international borders. Immigration officers in other countries sometimes question whether the person standing before them matches their passport, because the name is so impossibly long. Portuguese people traveling abroad frequently have to explain their naming system to confused officials who think there's been a clerical error. Meanwhile, in Portugal, having only 2 names like John Smith would seem oddly minimalist, almost like the person doesn't have a proper family history. The cultural expectation is that your name tells a story about where you came from, who your people are, and which families merged to create you. It's genealogy embedded directly into your legal identity, carried with you every single day. You're walking through a beautiful Portuguese plaza, watching tourists toss breadcrumbs to flocks of pigeons and thinking about joining in. Stop right there. Feeding pigeons in public spaces throughout Portugal is actually illegal, and municipalities take this law seriously. Many Portuguese cities have implemented strict regulations designed to reduce pigeon populations because of the potential health risks and sanitation issues these birds create in dense urban areas. When pigeon populations explode, they leave disease-carrying droppings everywhere, damage historic buildings and monuments with their acidic waste, and create noise pollution that drives residents crazy. Cities like Lisbon, Porto, and Coimbra have designated enforcement officers who patrol popular tourist areas, specifically looking for people feeding pigeons. If caught, you can face official warnings or financial penalties depending on the municipality. The Portuguese argument is straightforward. Artificially feeding wild birds creates unnaturally large populations that the urban ecosystem cannot support. These oversized flocks then become dependent on human food sources, lose their natural foraging behaviors, and concentrate in specific areas where tourists congregate. The result? Certain plazas and squares become absolutely covered in pigeon droppings, creating health hazards and visual blight that damages the city's appearance. Compare this to places like Venice or Trafalgar Square in London, where feeding pigeons was once a beloved tourist activity before those cities also banned it. Portugal simply got ahead of the curve. But tourists who don't know about these regulations keep trying to share their snacks with the birds, creating ongoing tension between well-meaning visitors and local authorities trying to maintain public health standards. So when you see those adorable pigeons waddling toward you expectantly, resist the urge. Keep your food to yourself, respect the local regulations, and avoid becoming another foreigner who learned about Portuguese wildlife laws the hard way. In 1494, Portugal and Spain literally drew a line down the middle of the globe and decided which country got which half. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed on June 7, established a meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything east of that line belonged to Portugal for exploration and colonization. Everything west of it belonged to Spain. No other countries were consulted, no other nations had any say. Portugal and Spain, backed by Pope Alexander VI, simply declared themselves owners of any undiscovered lands on Earth and divided the whole planet between them like two children splitting candy. Picture the audacity required to make such a declaration. Millions of people already lived in the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. These continents had ancient civilizations, complex societies, established governments, and rich cultures that existed for thousands of years before any European ship arrived. But Portugal and Spain looked at a map, drew a line, and announced that all these places now belonged to one of them, depending on which side of an arbitrary meridian they fell on. The indigenous peoples living there? Their opinions didn't matter. Their sovereignty didn't matter. Their existence was barely acknowledged in the treaty negotiations. This treaty shaped world history in ways that still affect us today. Portugal got Brazil, Africa, India, and Asia. Spain got most of the Americas. That's why Brazilians speak Portuguese while the rest of South America speaks Spanish. That's why Portugal colonized Goa, Macau, and Mozambique, while Spain took Mexico, Peru, and the Philippines. One treaty, drawn up by two European powers in 1494, determined which languages would dominate continents, which religions would spread where, and which colonial powers would exploit which resources and peoples for the next 4 centuries. The Treaty of Tordesillas represents European imperial arrogance at its most breathtaking. Two nations dividing a world they didn't own, filled with people they'd never met, based on exploration rights granted by a pope whom billions of Earth's inhabitants didn't recognize.